Hello, Professor Jeff.
Good afternoon. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm okay, thank you.
I just noticed that you probably don't have a time for the poem project. I didn't see any feedback or grade. It might be just not a time yet.
Not yet. Not done.
Okay.
Not done yet. I got to grade my grammar class too, but it'll happen.
Okay. Thanks.
We got a few people coming in. When Chen's here and Daryl's here. Hi, you guys. Daryl says hello in the chat.
Hi.
Ruba's here. Hey, Ruba.
Hi.
How you doing?
Fine.
Right.
I have a question about a sentence I heard on TV. Okay.
Yeah, let's do it. I'll put it on the screen.
The program was 911.
Okay.
When kids they behave aggressively and fight each other.
Okay.
Their parents bring a super nanny. Okay.
Okay.
The family have 4 boys.
Okay.
So the father said boys will be boys.
Yeah.
Is this an idiom?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
It's also a sort of special type of idiom. Do you know, this kind of is connected to our literature class. Do you know this is a pretty common idiom? It is what it is. Have you ever heard this?
Yes.
Yeah, this is called a tautology. And a tautology is a way to describe or define something by like with itself, right? So it's sort of like, and when you're defining something with itself, you are kind of repeating something, right? So it is what it is, boys will be boys. Another common idiom that's really biblical is everything is everything. These are tautologies. And like I said, it's where you define something with itself. So what was your understanding there, Ruba, of boys will be boys? What did that mean for you?
Because they are fighting and they have aggressive behavior.
Yes.
He said, boys will be boys.
Right. That's exactly right. Boys will be boys. That's exactly right. I mean, you got the meaning. And so you also understood that it's an idiom. Like I said, the only thing that I would add here is that there's a specific word to describe an idiom or a saying like this, and it's called a tautology.
In the advertisement, one day I heard it, they said, I didn't know it is boys. Sometimes I hear it as voice, not boys.
Voice, like speaking voice?
Yes.
Yeah. I think you heard that in an advertisement, Ruba?
Yes. Maybe because they say it quickly, and when I say boys, what I said.
B and B in English, well, in every language, right? That v in very and B as in boys, they're very close together. So sometimes it's when people speak quickly, it's hard to make those two different sounds clear and different from each other. Sometimes it's hard for speakers to hear the difference. And yeah, that's all I have to say. V, B, and P, right? We all use the lips and the tongue in a really similar way to make B, B, and P. So that'll happen, Ruba. Cool. That was fun. All right. I love that example. So we'll go ahead and get started. I know that a few people were coming in, and Nuri already asked about grades for the poetry project. So again, I'll only publish grades when I'm finished grading everybody's paper. And because they are not all done, I haven't published the grades, but I know I've got to do it. I've got essays to grade in my grammar class too. So I'm on it. I'm getting there. Outside or aside from that, today, really, here's the agenda is just, we're going to talk about fiction, but really today, I really want to talk about point of view and, well, you could call character analysis, but really, last week I sort of introduced the elements of fiction. And today when I say character analysis, it's really just a way of analyzing or talking about the different character types that we see in the book. So if you think about last week when I was talking about protagonist and antagonist, okay, that's pretty clear, right? Like in my example of a comic book movie, it's very clear who the good guy is and who the bad guy is, right? But character analysis that we're gonna kind of do today is really just once you feel like you can identify the protagonist and the antagonist, we're just looking for the things that make those characters unique, right? Are they confident or are they shy? Are they happy or are they sad? Are they nervous or are they, you know what I mean? Like easygoing. So that's all I mean by character analysis. I don't have some extremely difficult system to teach you guys about how to analyze the character. I really think the best way to do a character analysis is to sort of think and talk about what we've read. So that's a lot of what I want to do today. I've got some pages and chapters, specific things that I want to look at. So if you have your book, let's see if it can. If you have your book, go ahead and get it out and have it with you, because I'll be talking about specific page numbers and some specific sentences today. So go ahead and get your book out. Before I get started though with today, any questions about anything, about the end of the semester, about this class, about assignments, any questions at all that I can help answer before we start to talk about this book?
I have a question.
Yeah, one check.
So we have one more essay to finish, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll introduce, I think last week I said that I would present it to you today. I realized I want to show it to you next week. So that will be due at the very end of the semester. You'll still have, I think, 3 weeks to work on it. But really, it's going to be an essay to sort of talk about these elements of fiction. So I didn't want to assign you the paper without starting to do at least one example, right, of how to analyze this book. So get ready for that next week. I'll sort of tell you what I want you to do and when it will be due and all that stuff. But what I will ask you to do will be very similar to what we're doing today, right? That's why I'm glad you guys are here with me right now. If you're watching on the video, this type of analysis, talking about different characters and talking about different events and themes in the book, this is what I'm going to ask you to do in writing before the end of the semester. Thank you for your question, Wen Chen. Any other questions? Can I ask, you guys don't have to answer if you don't want to, but how are you guys? Are you guys okay? You're tired? You ready? You're happy? What's going on? How are we? What's the temperature in the room? I can't tell. What's going on?
It's getting cold again.
Good. What'd you say, Fazal? It's good again?
It's getting cold again. It's cold today.
It's getting cold again. Yeah, I know. I've got my jacket on today. Good. So as I was thinking about the weather, I'm with you. That's important. Cool. Anybody else? How you feeling? I'm looking at the chat. Daryl says, I'm tired, LOL. Daryl, I feel you. Martha says, I'm good, thank you. Martha, I'm glad to hear you're doing well. Daryl says he's tired. I think a lot of students have said they're tired. Anybody else? Tired, happy, good, weather, cold, sun. Anybody else? How we doing?
I just finished 2 exams, so I'm very tired. I didn't finish the book. I only read 30 pages, so I don't have time. So
that's okay. I think I've got stuff. I think up to page 50 today. So we'll see how much we can get. Okay. Wen Chen saying 2 tests. How'd they go, Wen Chen?
the history was terrible, but the political science were okay. So
okay. Ay, so stressful. I feel like I can hear your stress, Wen Chen. That's why I'm laughing, just because I know you guys work so hard and it's so stressful. So I'm not laughing at you. Please. Nori says thumbs up. I know. Rahila says she's doing well. I'm glad to hear that too. Good. So it sounds like you guys are doing okay. And can I ask too, Wen Chen there was just saying she got to read 30 pages. Does anyone want to say or put in the chat? I hope you read even 1 chapter. How are we doing on the book? Have we started? How far have we gotten? And again, I'm not asking to make you feel bad. I'm just asking to know what I should talk about today. When Chen says 30 pages, how about give me a thumbs up? How about we'll do it this way? Give me a thumbs up either on the screen or the emoji. Thumbs up if you read 30 or more pages. Thumbs up if you read 30 or more. Ruba says thumbs up. Ruba probably finished the whole book. Martha says thumbs up. Martha says 50. If you got 50, okay, we're good. If you guys read 50, even 30, you're definitely ready to talk about some of the ideas that I wanted to show you guys today. Okay, so then let's do this. My warm-up question is here. Let me pause my screen share 1 second, and then I'll show you the sort of discussion question. Okay, so here's my warm-up. And you guys can tell me if you want to do this in small groups or just like if you want to do it in small groups and talk to each other, or if we just want to do it in a big group together here. My question today that I want to introduce to talk about character analysis is to talk about how the author, Ursula K. Le Guin, is playing with different points of view and how that point of view affects our perception, our understanding of the characters. So for people who read 30 pages, people who read 50 pages, could you tell me what's the narrative style in this book and how does this affect POV? So let's start really simple. Is this first person, second person, or third person narrative?
I believe it's third person.
Good, excellent, good. Yes, Nori is exactly correct. Yeah, this is third person narrative, right? He, she, he did this. They said that. She did that. Good. Daryl says omniscient there in the chat. That was going to be my next question. So this is definitely third person singular, right? The author is using a sort of a narrative style where it's he said, she said. Now, Daryl is saying omniscient, right? Do we understand? Do we hear some of the things the characters think and feel? And we can solve this in a really simple way. So this is here, I've got 2 things, right? I've got my paper book, but I also put, there's a PDF copy of the book. But if you look here on the paper book, on page 2, page 2. And even just from the very beginning, right? If we look at these examples of narrative. So again, we read that first long sort of metaphor that begins the story, right? But then right after that, we get some sort of classic examples of third person narrative. And Daryl was talking about omniscient narration. Martha was saying that, yes, we do get the narrator telling us how characters feel and what characters think. But let's just look at this first example as a really nice example of third person narration. And of course, descriptive detail as well. So his eyelids, and again, I'm here on page 2 in the book, and this is on the screen. You can follow along too. His eyelids had been burned away so that he could not close his eyes, and the light entered into his brain, searing. He could not turn his head, for blocks of fallen concrete pinned him down, and the steel rods projecting from their cores held his head in a vice. When these were gone, he could move again. He sat up. He was on the cement steps, a dandelion flowered by his hand, growing from a little cracked place in the steps. After a while, he stood up, but as soon as he was on his feet, he felt deathly sick and knew it was the radiation sickness. The door was only 2 feet from him, for the balloon bed, when inflated, half filled his room. He got to the door and opened it and went through. There stretched the endless linoleum corridor, heaving slightly up and down for miles, and far from it, very far, the men's room. He started out toward it, trying to hold on to the wall, but there was nothing to hold on to, and the wall turned into the floor. Easy now, easy there. The elevator's guard's face was hanging above him like a paper lantern, pallid, fringed with graying hair. It's the radiation, he said, but Manny didn't seem to understand, saying only, take it easy. Okay, so even if we just look at this paragraph here, we've definitely got third person narrative description. Can someone, either from looking at these sentences or just from your own sense, where do we see the difference between a third person narrative that is describing events that you could observe, like a camera, right? That was what we talked about in the videos last week, versus this omniscient narrator that talks about what the character's feeling or thinking, right? Where is an example of omniscient narration in this paragraph? There's not that many, actually, and that's why I wanted to use this as an example to help you understand the difference between third-person narration, sort of objective, third-person narration, omniscient. Where do we get an omniscient sentence, my people?
I think there's a stretch in the endless luminance corridors.
Good. There stretched the endless linoleum corridor, heaving slightly up and down for miles, and far from it, the men's room. Interesting example here, Nori, because we do have sort of two, right? We can't say, oh, he was standing in a hallway, there was this linoleum floor. Linoleum is that kind of thin plastic sheet flooring that you see in some buildings. But we then get this kind of like heaving up and down for miles. Well, obviously that's not true, but if you're sick or if you're kind of woozy, right? If you feel very ill, it kind of, sometimes it can feel like the floor is moving, right? Heaving means to move back and forth. So we do get this feeling of, okay, he's in the hallway, he's looking at the men's room, but he feels like there's this, the reader can understand it, feels like he's moving up and down, right? So I think this is a nice example, yeah. I think there's one sentence that's even more clearly omniscient narration. We get some that are clearly third person objective, third person neutral, right? When these were gone, he could move again. He sat up. He was on the cement steps. A dandelion flowered by his hand, growing from a little cracked place in the steps. After a while, he stood up. Right here, we've got fact, fact, fact. He did this. He looked there. He saw this. There was a flower, right? But then we get something like this. This is kind of just like Daryl was saying, that there is a lot of third person omniscient narration in this story, and that is absolutely correct. But I want to make sure you start to notice these things. A sentence like, but as soon as he was on his feet, he felt deathly sick and knew it was the radiation sickness, right? In a third person narrative, only the omniscient narrator can give us this detail, right? Here, the author, the narrator, is telling us what he felt, what he knew in his mind. And this is, again, a big, big light to you, the reader, saying, okay, the narrator for this story has omniscient powers. They might be able to tell me what people are thinking, feeling, in addition to what they're doing and saying. Does that make sense? Questions? Okay, then I want to talk about, I don't have, what do I say? I don't have reading tests for you guys, but I do want to make sure that if you have questions about just the narrative, like what's happening in the plot, let's talk about that now. So any questions about what happens or what's going on in this first chapter, this first little short chapter where we meet George? Because my discussion of points of view and narrative style and character analysis is really going to begin in chapter 2. But I want to make sure, are there any questions just about the plot? And remember, plot is just like the narrative for the papers that you already wrote, beginning, middle, and end. Any questions about the plot, about what's going on here in chapter 1? Cool. Okay, so for people who maybe aren't here but do have questions, you know, the quick gist of it is George is very sick. George, or our protagonist, has been stealing medication so that he can stop his dreams from happening. We get a lot more details about sort of the world that they live in, the way that the government is set up, the system of medication and the healthcare system. There's a lot of details that help explain sort of the setting, right? Like we talked about last week, the setting for this story. But again, because we only have a limited time in this class to talk about novels, I'm really going to focus on character. So again, if you ever have a question about the plot, the details, the narrative, any of that stuff, stop me anytime. I'm happy to explain what is going on in the world of this story. But I think that focusing on character analysis and point of view is really going to make you a better reader of fiction in any language. So that's why I choose to focus on that. So again, the plot, the setting here is, you know, he's in Portland. He's had this terrible experience. He's stealing other people's medication or taking other people's medication to try and stop himself from dreaming. But he gets found out, he gets in trouble. And so that he can avoid going to jail, he has to go to something called VTT. You will see that acronym in this book many times. That stands for Voluntary Therapeutic Treatment, I think. And that's really what sets it up, again, thinking about setting. That's really what sets us up for chapter 2, where we meet Dr. Haber, right? But again, now I'm going to ask, because we're thinking about points of view, right? So we said that the narrative style for this story is third person omniscient. That is correct. But in this first chapter in the book, whose point of view are we coming from? Like, we are seeing the world through the narrator's eyes, right? But sort of, where is the focus of that narrator? Which character?
George?
Thank you, Nori. Yes, George, right? This first chapter is really, we're seeing things through George's eyes. We get that really painful paragraph that I just read describing he's sitting outside, he's on the concrete steps, he sees this flower. We are kind of seeing the world as George sees it, right? Now, if we look at chapter 2, did anybody notice a difference? Whose point of view do we really see in chapter 2? Starting on page 6 in your paper book, and I'm projecting it here on this screen. And does anyone have a feeling right away whose point of view do we get? I'll read the beginning just to see if that helps make some connections. So the beginning of chapter 2, again, we get these quotes at the beginning of each chapter.
In chapter 2, there is a description for Dr. Haber.
Yes, there's a description for Dr. Haber. And now again, I want to be careful here. This is a third person story, okay, you guys? We're not literally seeing the world through George's eyes. It's not I, me, me. But one thing that is unique about this book is in different chapters, the author will sort of present things from different perspectives. So Ruba, not only do we meet Dr. Haber, but I'm going to say we're sort of seeing the world as Dr. Haber sees it, right? We're seeing the world through Dr. Haber's eyes in a certain way. And I wanted to talk about this because this connects back to this idea of reliable or unreliable narrators that we talked about last week, right? Now, one thing that this book, I think, it does with a real genius is it will show you the same event. Let's say here's the event, and it will show you how different people see the event from different angles, right? Now, that can feel complicated in a story, but because we really only have 3 main characters in this book, I think it's sort of easier to keep track of. But it does raise the question of, well, whose understanding, whose thoughts and feelings, since we get those omniscient thoughts and feelings, whose thoughts and feelings are right? Whose are true? And even just the difference at the beginning of the chapter, right? So we get the quote at the beginning, the portal of God is non-existence. And then we get some description and setting. Dr. William Haber's office did not have a view of Mount Hood. It was an interior efficiency suite on the 63rd floor of Willamette East Tower and didn't have a view of anything. But on one of the windowless walls was a big photographic mural of Mount Hood. And at this, Dr. Haber gazed while intercommunicating with his receptionist, right? And now again, this is a stylistic thing. I don't want you to worry about this too much here. But even in this sentence here, at this, Dr. Haber gazed while intercommunicating with his receptionist. Here, the narrator is creating a scene where the reader sort of imagines Dr. Haber sitting in a chair and Dr. Haber is looking at the wall. And in that same way, we understand that this chapter, we, the reader, are seeing things as Dr. Haber sees them, right? Because the next few things that I want to look at is Dr. Haber is going to start to describe his world, is going to start to describe George Orr, right, our protagonist. And if we aren't aware of how the author is playing with point of view and how the author is playing with narration, we might assume that this is an objective, truthful representation of George Orr, right? And I'll show you some more quotes of this in a second. But just to continue so that hopefully you get this understanding, right? Chapter 1, third person omniscient, but really the point of view there is really George. Chapter 2, third person omniscient, right? We're still going to look at some examples of where the author tells us what characters are thinking and feeling, right? But we are really seeing from the point of view of Dr. Haber, right? So who's this Orr coming up, Penny? The hysteric with leprosy symptoms? She was only 3 feet away through the wall, but an inter-office communicator, like a diploma on the wall, inspires confidence in the patient as well as in the doctor. And it is not seemly for a psychiatrist to open the door and shout, "Next." "No, doctor, that's Mr. Green tomorrow at 10. This is the referral from Dr. Waiters at the University Medical School, a VTT case." "Ah, drug abuse, right. Got the file here. Okay, send him in when he comes." Even as he spoke, he could hear the elevator whine up and stop, the doors gasp open, then footsteps, hesitation, the outer door opening. He could also, now he was listening, hear doors, typewriters, voices, toilets flushing in offices all up and down the hall and above him and underneath him. The real trick was to learn how not to hear them. The only solid partitions left were inside the head. Now Penny was going through the first visit routine with the patient, and while waiting, Dr. Haber gazed again at the mural and wondered when such a photograph had been taken. Blue sky, snow from foothills to peak, years ago, in the 60s or 70s, no doubt. The greenhouse effect had been quite gradual, and Haber, born in 1962, could clearly remember the blue skies of his childhood. Nowadays, the eternal snows were gone from all the world's mountains, even Everest, even Erebus, fiery-throated on the waste Antarctic shore. But of course, they might have colored a modern photograph, faked the blue sky and white peak, no telling. So again, I wanted to read the beginning of these chapters because you're getting lots of important information, right? Not just about the setting and the plot, but also about the characters and the way that they see the world. So let's just kind of bounce around here, and I'd love type in the chat or unmute yourself. Let's stick with setting. Remember, setting is when, where, right? When, where. So what do we learn about the setting for this novel, just from these first few paragraphs in chapter 2? And remember, setting means macro and micro, right? Big picture, small picture. What do we learn?
I know it's inside the building.
Good. And what do we get about that? Yes, it's inside a building. And what do we learn about this building? Big building, small building, quiet, loud. How does the author describe the setting of the building?
It has a 60. So it's a tall building.
Excellent.
Yeah, it has the many floors. Where's Dr. Herbert office located?
Good. Perfect. Good. Anybody else want to help, Nori?
It doesn't have any light. It's like kind of dark.
Good.
And it has the doctor's certificate or in the wall.
Good.
And it has a picture.
Good.
And that's it. And then they describe the picture.
Fantastic. Good. And Martha's really doing a great job there, even just describing Dr. Haber's office. It's dark, no windows. There's a big mural. There's a big picture on the wall. There's some items on the wall. There's this intercom, right? A button to press to talk to his receptionist. Great. Good, good, good. So we could even go, in this example, you could even go micro, right? Dr. Haber's office. Dr. Haber's office is inside the Willamette Towers, the building, right? That Nori was talking to us. I'd also add, there's the paragraph where he talks about how loud it is. He could hear other people talking, toilets flushing, right? We get this feeling, hopefully the reader can get this feeling of like, ooh, it's very cramped, it's very tight, it's very loud. Things are right on top of each other. And then how about, again, the setting? We learned some things about the year and the time and that big picture, that macro setting. So what did we learn about the setting of the world that this book takes place in, again, just from these few chapters? What's all this stuff about the mountains?
It's the things change.
Go on.
Because they are saying which one? Because the snow were gone from the outer world of the mountain.
Good. Yeah, you want to, so what, and I know you know now, I think you're clear here, Wen-Chen, but tell us, so if we think about setting means big picture and little picture, so in the world of this book, what that change, like you were saying, no snow on the mountains, what else do we learn in these sentences here, Wen-Chen?
And also they are color and modern photograph, fake the blue sky and the white, pink, no telling.
Yeah, good. So, and I like that. Right. So in this, oh, that's deep right there. So what does that mean to you, Wen-Chen, that sentence? And then I'll let you stop talking, but just say one more thing. What does that sentence show you about the world, the setting of this book?
I don't know if my answer is correct or not, but I'm just saying the people want see what they want to see.
Oh yeah, I love it. I love it. Yeah, I love it. I love that one, Chen, because even that sentence, again, why I love teaching literature is you guys helped me see this book in new different ways. And I told you guys I love this book. But even at the beginning, right, we do get this contrast between what's real and what's fake, right? People see what they want to see. Like you were saying, when Chen is reality versus dreams, right? If you read 30 pages or 50 pages, you definitely understand this book is doing some sort of interesting, crazy things with dreams and reality. And even at the beginning, we understand, oh, they could have faked the blue sky put in digital snow. So right from the beginning, there's this feeling of like, well, this picture is in Dr. Haber's office. And even Dr. Haber is thinking, oh, I don't know if this is an old picture. Is the snow real? Did they just fake it? I don't know. So I love that example, Wen-Chen. Yeah, good. So what I, again, just to summarize here, if you're watching the recording, this is in just these few short paragraphs, right? This is page 6 and 7 in your paper book. We've got very important information about Dr. Haber's office, the setting. It's small, it's windowless, there's a mural, there's some things on the wall. It's in a very tall, big building that's very loud. You can hear the toilets, you can hear doors opening. It's a busy, crowded place. And then in the setting that's the world of this book, we get, okay, the greenhouse gases have caused the planet to warm up. There's no snow on Everest, but maybe people still fake photos or add snow to pictures of mountains to sort of give you that feeling of what it was like in the past, right? That's what Wen-Chen was just saying to us there. Good. Questions about setting and how we just did that really quickly, analyzing the setting in this chapter. Cool. And again, I'm trying to do this at the beginning of each chapter because I'm not interested in giving you a test on, do you know the setting for this book? I don't care. What I'm trying to teach you is how to read a short story or a novel and start to ask yourself these questions, right? And notice, right? Because a good author, a good book is giving you these clues, right? This is the difference, again, between academic writing that you guys already did in 325 and 340. You know, a research paper says, this paper is about why, what would be a good research paper, right? Why we need more traffic lights to save people's life when they are driving. Facts, right? And then it's just facts, facts, facts. You know, the difference between this is the author here, Ursula K. Le Guin, doesn't say, you know, it was a new world. Everything was melted. We could not know the difference between what's real and what's fake. No, right? We have to sort of understand and access it from what the author gives us, from the point of view and from narration. And again, that's why poetry, analyzing poetry, helps get you ready for literature, because it's not one perfect, clear, black and white, true, false answer when we're analyzing fiction. Do you know what I mean? Okay, last call for settings. Any questions about the setting in this chapter? Because now I'm moving on to character analysis stuff. Cool. All right. So now we're going to meet George. Well, actually, we already met George, right? The author gave us an introduction to George first in the beginning of chapter 1. Again, big sort of clues telling you protagonist, protagonist, protagonist. Here's the first character you're going to meet. But now we get to see Dr. Haber meeting George. So we get this quote here, good after, and this is on page 7 in your paper book, right? About middle of the page, new paragraph. Good afternoon, Mr. Orr, he said, rising, smiling, but not extending his hands. For many patients these days had a strong dread of physical contact. The patient uncertainly withdrew his almost proffered hand, fingered his necklace nervously, and said, how do you do? The necklace was the usual long chain of silvered steel, clothing ordinary, office worker standard, haircut conservative, shoulder length, beard short, light hair and eyes, a short, slight, fair man, slightly undernourished, good health, 28 to 32, unaggressive, placid, milquetoast, repressed, conventional. The most valuable period of relationship with a patient, Haber often said, is the first 10 seconds. Okay. Now, this is a short paragraph, you guys, but there's a lot going on here that I can use to talk about point of view and narration, right? So what's happening? Someone just tell me what's going on in this paragraph. What are we doing? What's the author doing in this paragraph?
Describing Dr. Harper?
Okay, are we describing Dr. Haber or George?
Haber, Dr. Haber.
George.
Is it George? Is it George?
Now, this is the description of George, but who?
Oh, yeah.
But who is describing George?
The author, right?
Now, they get perfect. I heard both of you. I heard Nori say the author, and I heard Wen Chen say Haber. Now, this is what is so interesting about this book, right? Like, and this is why point of view, understanding point of view and how it connects to narration is so important, right? So, Nori, you're absolutely correct. Of course, everything that we read in this book, the author is giving it to us. And again, especially in a class like this, I chose the book, right? I'm telling you, even if a student says, you know, I didn't like this book, it wasn't for me, totally fine. We all have different taste, right? But this is a good book with clear intentions and specific ideas. And she knows that she is playing with point of view here. So the author is, of course, describing George for us. But this is why point of view is so important. When we understand that this chapter is from Dr. Haber's point of view, we have to understand that when we read this paragraph and it says, especially starting here, right, this list, clothing, ordinary, office worker standard, haircut, conservative, shoulder length, beard short, light hair and eyes, a short, slight, fair man, slightly undernourished, good health, 28 to 32, unaggressive, placid, milk toast, repressed, conventional. Now, this is absolutely the author describing George, and it is describing George with a description or with the way that Dr. Haber sees George, right? And again, if you moved on to chapter 3 and you read the chapter where we meet Heather Lalash, we eventually see Heather's impression, Heather's point of view about the type of man, the type of person, the type of character that George is. But here in this chapter, from the very beginning, we get Dr. Haber's perceptions of George, right? And these are those perceptions, right? So Dr. Haber sees George as unaggressive, placid. Placid means calm, still. Milk toast. Milk toast is a really fun and interesting word that sort of means standard, ordinary. I don't know if anybody looked this up, but I want to make sure I give you the actual definition here. Boring, bad. I mean, milk toast is a really bad, milk toast is not a nice word to use to describe a person. M-I-L, I think I missed a U, M-I-L-Q-U-E. Oh, they don't even have it in Merge Dictionary. Ah, good. Milk toast, a timid or feeble person, right? Weak. Milk toast sort of means timid, weak, but shy might not be negative, right? Shy just might mean neutral. Milk toast is a negative word to use to describe a person. So unaggressive, placid, milk toast, repressed, conventional, right? Yes. Now we're going to keep going here, but does this idea make sense about understanding that if we're aware of point of view and how an author is playing with point of view, when we read a description of a person, place, or thing, it's really important to be aware of point of view, because then we can understand, oh, we are seeing this person, place, or thing from the perspective of a certain character. Does that idea make sense? Give me thumbs up if it makes sense. Martha says thumbs up. Wen Chen says thumbs up. Okay, good. That's great. Okay, and then I wanted to go to, now I want to talk about, the next thing that I have highlighted that I wanted to talk about for us is on page 14. But of course, between now and page 14, we get lots of information. So any questions? Did anybody have any ideas, or did anybody underline or circle or anything between this page where we hear Dr. Haber's, where we read Dr. Haber's description of George, and page 14? So anything that you have questions about before then? Good. Okay, so someone then just summarize for me, again, the people that I know read a little bit, what's going on here? What's what's the problem? We talked about it a little bit, but why? What does George try to explain to Dr. Haber, right? This is now plot, right? So what's the challenge? If we're just trying to understand what's going on in the story, what is the problem George wants to solve?
George has a dream that every time he dreams, it becomes reality, and he doesn't want to go through the suffering. He doesn't want any changes.
Good.
I think he tried to. He's looking for help, and going to Dr. William to get help, but we also have this feeling that Dr. William used him for his experiments. That's come later on.
Yeah, we're going to find out. Dr. Haber is a really interesting character for sure. Yes, I love it. So Nuri sort of said there, yeah, absolutely. George has dreams, and sometimes the only thing he'll change from what Nuri said is not all of his dreams, but some dreams he calls effective dreams, right? Effective with an E means they work, right? Effective means they work, they do their job. They're effective dreams because he has a dream, and those dreams literally change reality, right? Now, the other thing that's important to understand for the plot of this story, if you're following along here with me in class, or if you're watching the recording, is other people in the world have no memory of the world before the dream, right? So this is something that's really important to understand. George, at least so far on this page in the book, he is the only one who remembers the world as it was. He is the only one who knows that the world has changed, even if that change is very, very, very dramatic, right? And this is this awareness that he has, this knowledge that he has, that his dreams are changing reality, is sort of, I think it's fair to say, driving him a little bit crazy, right? And that's why he was trying to take these drugs. That's why he was trying to avoid and stop himself from dreaming. He can't really handle it. He can't really tolerate his own awareness of the fact that his dreams are changing reality. And no one else remembers it. And no one else remembers it. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, I think that's all I wanted to say about plot. Yeah, Ruba talked about this a little bit last week, his issue with his aunt and the dream that he had about his aunt, and then his aunt dies in a car crash. So again, and I want to just say this again to everybody who's here with me, you guys, Rahila, Martha, Fazal, everybody. If I'm going too quickly and you really are like, Jeff, I still don't know what this book is about, please stop me. If you have plot questions, right, what happens, stop me. But I'm really going to talk about character and theme the most, okay? So stop me if you need help with the plot. But I want to go to page 14 because now we're going to start, I want to start to connect the character, point of view, and theme, right? Because theme is really, what's going on? What is this book really about? And of course, the way that we get to theme oftentimes is by looking at what characters think, do, and say, right? Again, the author doesn't say, this is a book about dreams. I think that dreams are very powerful. Dreams can shape our life. No, the author doesn't say that. If the author wanted to say that, they would write nonfiction. They would write a research paper. They would study dreams in a university, right? This is fiction. This is literature. This is art, right? So if you go to page 14, you can see some examples of where the characters really start to interact and to say things that are connected to the theme. So let me find this here in my paper. But I'm on page 14 in the book, so you can go ahead and go there. This one. Okay. I also want, let's go here. I'm on page 14. Actually, I want to start a little bit earlier on page 13. Well, she didn't. I want to start here on page 13. Oh, I also wanted to ask anybody who's here, does anybody want to read? Does anybody want to read this to the class instead of just me? You guys are kind of a quiet group, but I want to give you the chance. Does anybody want to read? No, Jeff, we're tired. Okay, I'm going to start on page 13. If anybody ever does want to read out loud, I'll just share with you one of my favorite things, one of my favorite experiences when I was in university, 20 years ago. I love reading out loud. I think it's a great opportunity. So if anybody ever wants to read, please stop me. You're more than welcome to. So let's look at page 13, starting here. Well, she didn't dream it. I mean, the dream really did change reality. It made a different reality retroactively, which she'd been part of all along. Being in it, she had no memory of any other. I did. I remembered both because I was there at the moment of change. This is the only way I can explain it. I know it doesn't make sense, but I've got to have some explanation or else face the fact that I am insane. No, this fellow was no milquetoast. And again, this little sentence here on page 13, you guys, this is another really big, clear clue that this is totally from Dr. Haber's point of view, right? We almost are inside Dr. Haber's head as he's listening to George and giving us, the reader, his opinion about what George is saying, right? So again, here, a paragraph where George is talking, right? George is just talking. We get sort of that third person objective narrator here. It's almost like a camera. We feel like a video, on our phone is recording video. Here's what the character said. Then we go inside Dr. Haber's head. No, this fellow was no milquetoast. He's changing his opinion. He's revising his feelings about George based on what he's hearing. And then we go back to the sort of third person narrative where we get Dr. Haber's speech, but again, it's still part of Dr. Haber's point of view. And this is what I'm saying it over and over again in this class, because so many times students will struggle with this, that narrative style, the way the story is written in terms of narration, it might always be the same as point of view, but not always, right? Narration and point of view are sometimes two different things. So now we get Dr. Haber's words. I'm not in the judgment business, Mr. Orr. I'm after facts. And the events of the mind, believe me, to me are facts. When you see another man's dream as he dreams it recorded in black and white on the electrosynopholograph, as I've done 10,000 times, you don't speak of dreams as unreal. They exist. They are events. They leave a mark behind them, okay? I take it that you had other dreams that seem to have this same sort of effect. Some, not for a long time, only under stress, but it seemed to be happening oftener. I began to get scared. Haber leaned forward. Why? Or looked blank. Why scared? Because I don't want to change things, Orr said, as if stating the super obvious. Who am I to meddle with the way things go? And it's my unconscious mind that changes things without any intelligent control. I tried auto-hypnosis, but it didn't do any good. Dreams are incoherent, selfish, irrational, immoral, you said a minute ago. They come from the unsocialized part of us, don't they? At least partly. I didn't want to kill poor Ethel. I just wanted her out of my way. Well, in a dream, that's likely to be drastic. Dreams take shortcuts. I killed her in a car crash 1,000 miles away 6 weeks ago. I am responsible for her death. Haber stroked his beard again. Therefore, he said slowly, the dream suppressant drugs so that you will avoid further responsibilities. Okay, so this part that I've got in blue here, you guys, I'm saying this is where we get sort of the connection, the intersection of character, point of view, and theme. So I'd love to hear you guys talk about any of those things, but especially theme. Like, what are we learning about George as a character, as a human being? And now I'm sort of twisting to character analysis here. What are we learning about George as a human being based on these sentences that I've got in blue here?
I think George is not selfish. He feel more. He felt that he killed her aunt because of his dream. So he's he's worried that maybe other thing can happen. But he's more, I guess, more responsible and.
Ooh, I love it. Okay, I love Nuri. And again, if you're here with us, if you're watching the recording, this is like a preview of what I'll ask you to write about next week. Nuri, you're doing character analysis right now, especially when you said selfish and responsible, right? Now, again, I'm saying those two words because the author doesn't say George was a responsible man, right? But just from reading these sentences, we do get some feeling about who he is. And that's all I'm talking about, right? When I talk about character analysis, Nori. So could you say, is there a sentence or a word or that word responsible? I really love that you said there, Nori. Is there one sentence or a word that gave you that feeling of, oh, George is a responsible person?
You say, I'm responsible for her death. You think that
good.
He killed them because of his dream.
Good. Great. I love it. I love it. I love it. And again, just like I asked you guys to do for poetry, all I'm going to ask you to do for this paper is, make a claim, make an argument, George is a responsible person, and then show me in the text where you got that feeling. So absolutely. So Nuri's pointing out this sentence where he says, I am responsible for her death. And we're saying, well, George is a person who takes a lot of responsibility. He feels like a very responsible person. That's it. That's all we're practicing right now. Good. Anybody else? Somebody. Nori's the hero for class today. Anybody else want to get in there and say something about what they feel about either George as a character, or again about those themes that I introduced last week? I think I've got the slide here this week again. This is going to be the same slide from yesterday, but again, the themes that are in this book: dreams and reality, mental health and therapy, knowing and not knowing, action and inaction. Do we see any of those themes in this little paragraph here? I do.
Yeah, when he says dreams are incoherent, selfish, irrational, immoral, he's I think he's referring about like sometimes dreams. A lot of people doesn't understand when we dream, and then we do it like we don't we can help the dreams, like we can help in the dreams.
Great, I love it. So in a certain way there, Martha, you tell me, but I heard this is sort of giving us at least George's opinion, maybe the author's opinion, about what dreams are or what dreams are like. Is that right, Martha?
Yes.
Cool. I love that. Good. So Martha went to that theme of dreams and reality, and maybe this is a paragraph or this is an example from the story where we feel like, ooh, here's an example of the author talking about dreams, what they are, what they do, where they come from, what they're like, right? And the words that I heard Martha point out there was that sentence about dreams are incoherent, selfish, irrational, immoral. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Good. Anybody else? And what I'd love to hear is, I'd love to hear this, especially these. I think there's some really powerful stuff going on here. Haber leaned forward. Well, George says he's scared, right? Scared of these dreams, scared of how powerful these dreams are. And Haber leans forward. Why? Or looked blank. Why scared? Because I don't want to change things, Orr said, as if stating the super obvious. What's going on there in terms of these two men, these two characters, different themes? What do you notice in those sentences?
I think George don't want to be like a super power to change things. He don't want to, because of his dream, when he's dreaming thing, reality, like he said, dream can take shortcuts, like actually do harm things to other people. I think that's bad.
Love it. Fantastic. I love that idea of superpower. Yeah, George doesn't want this superpower. And that really connects in an interesting way to something you said earlier a moment ago, Nori, about responsibility. So George feels like a very responsible person, but he doesn't want this much responsibility, right? The responsibility for all reality, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so do you get some sense, Nori, or anybody, so that, I think you're right. I think that's how George feels. Do we have some sense if Dr. Haber agrees, disagrees? Are these two men on the same page about this, a different page? What do you think?
I think Dr. Haber want to learn more about George. He want to do more experiments, more testing to see what he's actually doing.
Good. I think you're right. And I'll say I'll plant this seed now, because as the book continues and we talk about this for the next few weeks before finishing the semester, I love this question of, I began to get scared. Haber leans forward, why? Or look blank, and he says, why scared? So in a way, George is scared of having this much responsibility, right? He doesn't want to control reality. He doesn't want his dreams, which he can't control. He doesn't want his dreams to affect everybody's reality. But Dr. Haber doesn't seem as scared of that responsibility, right? And again, this is that protagonist-antagonist idea that I set up last week, right? I think a big difference between George and between George and Dr. Haber is their desire for that responsibility, their desire to control things, their desire to change things, in this word that George uses here, right? And I think we start to see this. Ursula Le Guin gives us a hint of this when he says, you know, why are you scared? I don't want to change things, as if stating the super obvious. This is another example of a subtle, beautiful, really, really beautiful example of how do we know that this chapter is from Dr. Haber's point of view? Well, a nice little sentence like this, as if stating the super obvious, right? There's a little bit of judgment to this, right? Dr. Haber says, why would you be afraid? Why would you be scared of this incredible superpower? And then George says, I don't want to change things, as if that were obvious. Now, some people might feel like that would already be obvious, right? Maybe for Dr. Haber, he's surprised that not everybody wants that power, wants that responsibility. But for George, it seems, well, I don't want to change things. So again, even in the way that these chapters are written, the sentence construction, the way that the narrator is presenting information to the reader, we are always seeing it through a specific character's point of view, and that point of view is giving us deep information about the characters, right? Makes sense? Questions?
I want to say just the general idea of the story.
Please.
George was upset from his body dreams, and his body dreams has had a negative impact on him. Okay, he went to Dr. Haber. He wanted to get help from Dr. Haber, but Dr. Haber used him as an instrument for his research. So he was more upset and aggressive. But I can't analyze this story like you, because you understand each word. We need more vocabulary to be known. And when I saw the movie or watched the movie, it helped me understand what this is the general idea.
Good. I think you're right. I was going to say, Ruba just said there the general idea. And I think what you did there, Ruba, is again, like a nice example of sort of when we're summarizing a plot summary, right? In just a paragraph or whatever, what's the story? What happens in the story? Or what's this character like? All those things are so important, Ruba. And before, it's why, like I said already in this class, excuse me, if you guys have questions about the plot, like, oh my God, what is happening? I don't even know what's going on. Then let's talk about that, because you're right. Before we can start to look at specific moments, specific characters, specific settings, specific themes, we do want to make sure that we can understand the plot, right? What's going on and what's happening. And what Ruba said, and we'll really get to talk about this more next week and 2 weeks from now, when George learns about some of Dr. Haber's intentions, some of Dr. Haber's goals, he does get upset. You're absolutely correct, Ruba, absolutely correct. But in this chapter, right, we do really see from this chapter, Dr. Haber's point of view, right? And again, even if you didn't see this point of view the first time you read it, that's totally fine. And again, the reason that I teach this the way that I teach it is, if you start to become aware of narrative style and point of view, I promise you will see this in all types of fiction, all languages, right? Authors love to play with this idea of point of view and who knows what and whose opinion is true and what does this character think of that other character, and sort of some of all that stuff. So the summary, the main ideas that Ruba just talked about are really, really important too, right? And they're absolutely connected. They're absolutely connected to some of this stuff. Good. So again, I want to just point out, as you start to think about or imagine writing about some of the things in this book, right? On page, that was on page, good, that was on page 14, that example of because I don't want to change things. I'm just sort of giving you, what's another meta, breadcrumbs to follow here as you think about where to find different examples of themes in the book, right? We get right from the beginning, George is saying, I don't want to change things. Right? I feel too much responsibility. I can't control my dreams. I don't want all this power. And Dr. Haber's kind of like, and like Ruba said, maybe I can use this man as my instrument.
I have a question.
Please, Wen-Chen.
Is that possible? Why the Dr. Haber asked why he's scared? Because he think it's just a dream. Maybe it's not come be true or doesn't believe the George.
Could be. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, because at this point we haven't seen him dream. Absolutely. Totally. So, and again, I would say to that, yes. And especially when you're reading the book the first time, right? This is the thing. I'm sort of presenting the book with knowledge and awareness. I've read the book many times, but you're absolutely correct, Wen-Chen. And I think something I'd point out is a good book, a good author is going to make sure that the story makes sense for the first time you read the book. Oh, well, maybe Dr. Haber doesn't believe George, or he's trying to figure out, is George crazy? George tells him, I need to find out if I'm insane or not in that sentence just before. So I think you're exactly correct, Wen-Chen. Like in the plot, if we think about analyzing the plot, Dr. Haber is going, ooh, what's going on? Is this person crazy? Is this true or not true? But then when we go back and analyze for theme and analyze for character, we can sort of see how something that from the plot perspective, maybe we can apply it to some of these bigger ideas. Does that make sense, Wen-Chen?
Yes.
Good. And it's why I when we talked about the narrative and personal narrative, I think it's great to say, okay, this sentence is more like a narrative sentence. This sentence is more like a descriptive sentence. I think that's helpful to do with that type of writing. In a good book, it's really hard to say, ooh, this one sentence is only about the plot, and this sentence is only about the theme. It's almost like different layers, right? Like if we imagine doing one layer, we can look at one layer. One layer is the plot, right? What happens when, who says this, what happens then, what happens in time order, right? But then for this type of class, again, the way that we started to analyze poetry, not just what does the word mean, but sort of what are the symbols? What is the metaphor? What does it represent? How does it connect to deeper feelings? That's sort of, again, what we're doing in this big picture way, right? When we're talking about analyzing fiction and when we're talking about analyzing literature. Great question, Wen-Chen. Great question. Any other questions before I go to page, I'm going to page 18, unless there are other questions. Other questions about the plot or anything we've talked about so far? All right, let's look at page 18. So on page 16 and 17, by the way, this is sort of some of what Ruba was telling us. We get a lot of descriptions about sort of what the technology in this world is, what the dream augmenter does. Again, this book represents some elements of science fiction. Science fiction is where the author imagines a world in the future, but sort of tries to use real, it's not fantasy, right? It's not dragons and magic. The author is sort of trying to imagine, based on the science of the time, sort of what the world might be like in the future. So we get this machine. Obviously, this machine, as described in the book, doesn't exist now. But a lot of the science, a lot of the ideas that she writes about what dreams are and where they come from, these are true, right? These are true things. So on those pages 16 and 17, we really get some description of the augmenter, how it works. We get some deep information as readers about sort of what dreams do in the human life and why we've evolved to have dreams. So there is this like sort of imaginary fantasy aspect part of this story where George has dreams that change reality. But then there's also this very real and serious thinking about sort of, well, dreams, humans do dream, and many mammals also dream, so what's going on? Like, what is that? Why is dreaming important to the survival of certain species, right? Like, if we evolved, if you want to go the religious route, right? If God designed creatures to dream, why? Or if humans evolved, if it's just science, right? Then what's the benefit? What's the scientific benefit for humans and dogs and whales and dolphins and the animals that dream? Why do they dream, right? So we get some of that discussion on page 16 and 17. And then before George uses the machine, we get another really lovely paragraph that I think gives us very deep and important information about character analysis. Here on page 18, about halfway through, George is talking to Dr. Haber about hypnosis and whether it works or not. I'll start here. He says, all right, good. This is Dr. Haber speaking. Now, tell me this, George. Does your dentist use a hypnotape, or is he a do-it-yourself man? Tape. I'm 3 on the susceptibility scale. Right in the middle of the graph, eh? Well, for suggestion as to dream content to work well, we'll want a fairly deep trance. We don't want a trance dream, but a genuine sleep dream. The augmenter will provide that, but we want to be sure the suggestion goes pretty deep. So to avoid spending hours and just conditioning you to enter the deep trance, we'll use VC induction. Ever seen it done? Orr shook his head. He looked apprehensive, but he offered no objection. There was an acceptant, passive quality about him that seemed feminine or even childish. Haber recognized in himself a protective, bullying reaction toward this physically slight and compliant man. To dominate, to patronize him was so easy as to be almost irresistible. What's going on here? Especially this paragraph, you guys. This is a gold mine in terms of point of view and character analysis. So what's going on here?
I think George is more from Dr. Harper view that George is more is a patient that it can be easily to be tested through this machine and can without any objection, and it's that's what I thought.
Great. Good. What else? Other ideas?
I And the doctor is kind of like reading, like or George, like trying to read him, like analyze him, and he saw that he was he had kind of like been bullied before, and he's very no weak, yeah, kind of like a weak or something, because the way he say um the the acceptance, like when you say passive quality about him.
Good, Martha. Perfect, perfect, perfect. Amazing, fantastic. Again, if you're watching the recording, say thank you to Nori and Martha. They're showing you examples of sort of like out loud character analysis. But the only thing I want to ask Martha, and anybody else can jump in too. Now, this is important for this point of view idea that I keep talking about today. Is this objectively true? Is the author saying George is weak, George is feminine, George is like a child? Or is that just Dr. Haber's opinion?
Dr. Haber's opinion?
That's exactly it, Martha. And that's why point of view is so important in all fiction and in this story, right? Because if we're not aware when we are reading what is going on with point of view, then especially because you're all such good academic students, right? And maybe you don't study literature like me. Maybe you haven't studied literature. Maybe you have, okay? So I'm not making any judgments on you guys, but you know, if you haven't spent a long time analyzing literature and most of the time you're reading textbooks or nonfiction, I think what we are really used to is what the author says is just the truth, right? Like this is the truth. In literature, we play with point of view to expose and understand different personalities, different characters, different ways of seeing the world. And then it's up to the reader to understand and sort of make meaning from those different points of view. So when you look at this, and I'll read it again because it's just so fantastic. Orr shook his head. He looked apprehensive, but he offered no objection. There was an acceptant, passive quality about him that seemed feminine or even childish. Haber recognized in himself a protective bullying reaction toward this physically slight and compliant man. To dominate, to patronize him was so easy as to be almost irresistible. Now, again, in this sort of interesting and complex way, the author is not giving us a judgment of George necessarily, but in a certain way, there's a judgment of Dr. Haber, right? What does it mean to us as the reader when we understand that for Dr. Haber, when he sees a person that he describes as acceptant or passive, he says that that's feminine. He says that that's childish. And he says that when he sees a person who is passive, who isn't super active, right? And again, thinking about the different themes in this book, action versus inaction, right? Active versus passive. So Dr. Haber says when he sees a person who is passive, he wants to dominate, to patronize him, and that it's almost irresistible. Now, again, I don't think that Ursula Le Guin here is saying Dr. Haber is evil, Dr. Haber is wrong, George is weak. I'm just sort of asking you to be aware of, oh, wow. Okay, so it's not that when I read this paragraph, the author is saying these things are true. It's this character thinks these things are true about this other character. So what does that tell me about Dr. Haber? Right? What does that tell me about George? Right? What does that tell me about the themes in this book? Right? And absolutely, when we think about protagonist and antagonist, or again, as I have on the slides here, themes are a really sort of basic and easy way to do themes is like either or, right? A versus B, binary examples. So what does it mean that we have these two characters who would seem to be totally different? George is passive and quiet. Dr. Haber is very active and aggressive, right? Dr. Haber describes George as feminine and childish. Pretty safe to believe then, Dr. Haber thinks of himself as masculine and strong and all these other things, right? So in this one short little paragraph here, we've got a lot of sort of deep stuff going on about theme, character, point of view, protagonist, antagonist, and sort of all of that is for the reader to sort of understand and think through on top of just the plot that we have here in the story. Questions or ideas about this paragraph here on page 18? Does that make sense what I'm saying? And if not, stop me.
I think that this small paragraph shows the character might be do something later.
Go on.
Because they are showing the two personality. So maybe making the reader guessing, maybe the Dr. Haber has a big change later. I think that's a point where for the reader to connect the story.
I love it. Absolutely. Yeah. You're exactly right, Wen-Chen. In a good book, yeah, the things that happen on page 20 will be connected to the things that happen at the end of the book. Absolutely. Absolutely, Wen-Chen. Absolutely. Good. Anybody else? All right. There's one more thing I wanted to talk about in chapter 2. And that starts on page 23 in your paper book, 23 in your paper book, and I'm going to go there on the screen. Okay. So I'm here, I'm going to start on page 23, but again, it's different on this PDF that I have here, but again, so you can follow along on the screen. So again, for people who, just to make sure we understand the plot and what's going on. So after that paragraph where Dr. Haber says that George is feminine and childish, George, puts on the equipment to use the machine. Dr. Haber puts him into a hypnotic state and then will allow him to access his dreams. He gives him some suggestion. He tells him to dream about a horse. George has a dream and he wakes up, right? He wakes up from the dream. And again, for the reader, if it's the first time you're reading this, you might be confused what's going on, right? Because I will just say one thing I love, oh my God, I love about this book is the experience of reading this book. Sometimes it can feel like the experience of having a dream because the idea, because the central story of the book is sort of this fantastic science fiction idea of, ooh, dreams change reality. Sometimes when I read it the first time, it feels like a dream almost, right? Reading the book feels like having a dream. You're kind of like, wait, what is going on? And like, wait, what just happened? What was real? What wasn't real? But it all feels kind of familiar too, right? It's not crazy. It's not just like a super crazy story. But so that's the moment in this chapter where George is kind of waking up and Dr. Haber told him to have an effective dream. He told him to dream about a horse and he's explaining that dream. And here's where it starts here on page 23 in your book. So Dr. Haber says, tell me about the dream. And George says, I was walking in this field and it was off in the distance for a while. Then it came galloping at me. And after a while, I realized it was going to run me down. I wasn't scared at all, though. I figured perhaps I could catch its bridle or swing up and ride it. I knew that actually it couldn't hurt me because it was the horse in your picture, not a real one. It was all sort of a game. Dr. Haber, does anything about that picture strike you as unusual? Well, some people find it over dramatic for a shrink's office, a bit overwhelming, a life-size sex symbol right opposite the couch, she laughed. Was it there an hour ago? I mean, wasn't that a view of Mount Hood when I came in, before I dreamed about the horse? Oh, Christ, it had been Mount Hood. The man was right. It had not been Mount Hood. It could not have been Mount Hood. It was a horse. It was a horse. It had been a mountain, a horse. It was a horse. He was staring at George Orr, staring blankly at him. Several seconds must have passed since Orr's question. He must not be caught out. He must inspire confidence. He knew the answers. George, do you remember the picture there as being a photograph of Mount Hood? Yes, Orr said in a rather sad but unshaken way. I do. It was. Snow on it. Haber nodded, judiciously pondering. The awful chill at the pit of his chest had passed. You don't. Let's talk point of view. This is in my book. I have like big stars and underlines. These that starts on page 23 and continues on to page 24 there. But what's going on with point of view? Let's talk about specific sentences and examples. How is Ursula Le Guin playing with point of view and narration in this part of chapter 2?
Professor Jeff, I'll give it a try.
Please.
So in this paragraph, I think George, from George's point of view, there was there's something changed after his dream. The photos of Mountain Hood changed to horse, and at the same time, from Dr. Harper view that he's little about nervous about George Green, that it actually did change the photos. That's what I'm not sure about that.
Good. And I think you're right. And I want to just, let me ask it even more specifically, Nori. I think in this section that I've got in blue here, there's some very clear sentences, that very clearly show the reader that this chapter is from Dr. Haber's point of view, that we are seeing the world as Dr. Haber sees it. Can you find or identify any of those sentences? And if not, you need help, that's totally fine, but you've been working hard.
Like that one, I say, well, some people find it dramatically for shrink office, but overwhelming and life size sex symbol right opposite.
Yeah,
So
what do you, yeah, I see Daryl, I see your hand too, so you'll go next, Daryl. What do you think is going on there, Nori?
I think he from his point of view, Dr. Crawford, that is different people seeing in different ways.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure.
Okay, all good, perfect. Daryl, go ahead.
Oh, Professor, I was just gonna ask what you asked. I was just gonna answer what you asked regarding what sentences that basically says which goes to Dr. Haber's point of view. I think it's the one that says, "Oh Christ, it had been Mount Hood. The man was right.
Yeah.
It had not been Mount Hood. It could have been the Mount Hood or something." So those sentences actually goes to Dr. Haber's point of view.
Absolutely, right? Absolutely. And again, perfect, Daryl, perfect. That's exactly what I wanted. I wanted to show you some examples where these sentences kind of have to be third person omniscient narration, but they also have to be third person omniscient narration from Dr. Haber's point of view, right? We're not in George's head, but we already know George knows that it was a mountain and now it's a horse, right? His dream changed the picture. His dream changed the reality. But this goes back to Wen Chen's great question too. Okay, maybe at the beginning of the chapter, Dr. Haber wasn't sure. Maybe George is crazy. Maybe he's not. Do I believe him? I don't know. Maybe he was asking those questions because he wasn't sure if George was sane or insane. But now we get some clear sentences where Dr. Haber doesn't tell George that he knows the picture changed. The author tells us, the reader. The author shows the reader that Dr. Haber knows, though, by using third person omniscient narration, right? So, well, was it there? George asks, was it there an hour ago? I mean, wasn't that a view of Mount Hood when I came in before I dreamed about the horse? Oh, Christ. It had been Mount Hood. The man was right. It had not been Mount Hood. It could not have been Mount Hood. It was a horse. It was a horse. It had been a mountain. A horse. It was a horse. It was. These sentences are clearly, we are inside Dr. Haber's head. So again, without the author saying, Dr. Haber knew that it was, knew that it used to be a mountain, but now it was a horse. Dr. Haber was nervous. Dr. Haber was afraid. Dr. Haber did not know. We don't need any of that, right? The author instead is using this combination of omniscient third person narration with a point of view. The author puts us in Dr. Haber's head and we understand, we feel him going, oh, whoa, okay, wait, it was a mountain, but wait, no, it couldn't have been a mountain. I thought that George was insane, but now it seems like he's telling the truth and dreams can't change reality, but his dream just changed my picture, right? We get that feeling from how the combination of narration and point of view come together. Right? The author is doing a lot of really interesting storytelling there by using narration and point of view. Does that make sense? If it makes sense, give me a thumbs. This is the most quiet I think you've ever. Yeah, please.
Sorry, I was cutting in and out earlier, so I kind of missed some of the conversations. But yeah, when I was reading the book, I was actually a little bit confused because when George came in, Dr. Haber doesn't know that he has the ability to change things, right? But basically in this part, does he already know that he has powers and then he can basically manipulate him maybe later in the chapters?
On this page, on page 24, yes. On page 24, the reader, I think the reader is supposed to understand that Dr. Haber knows that George's dreams change reality. But as we find, as we keep going, it's confusing for the reader because Dr. Haber doesn't tell that to George, right? Dr. Haber pretends like, no, George, like, no. What does he say? He says it's here on the page, right? He doesn't say yes or no. He goes, he was staring at George Orr, staring blankly at him. Several seconds must have passed since Orr's question. He must not be caught out. He must inspire confidence. He knew the answers. Character analysis, character analysis. Then he says, George, do you remember the picture there as being a photograph of Mount Hood? Yes, Orr said in his rather sad but unshaken way. I do, it was, snow on it. Haber nodded, judiciously pondering. The awful chill at the pit of his chest had passed. You don't? The man's eyes, so elusive in color, yet clear and direct in gaze, they were the eyes of a psychotic. No, I'm afraid I don't. It's Tammany Hall, the triple winner back in '89. I miss the races. It's a shame the way the lower species get crowded out by our food problems. Of course, a horse is a perfect anachronism, but I like the picture. It has vigor, strength, total self-realization in animal terms. It's sort of the ideal of what a psychiatrist strives to achieve in human psychological terms, a symbol. Anyway, so we get this we start to see, I'm just going to say the word, since there's some curse words, Dr. Haber just bullshitting, right? Like he is bullshitting himself. He is bullshitting George Orr. And I think partly it's because he has this image of, like it says here, what he should be like, right? What a psychiatrist should be like. He must not be caught out. He must inspire confidence. He knew the answers. And again, if you think about characters, this is totally different from George. George is very comfortable saying, I don't know, or I don't think we should do anything. George is passive. George is calm. George is relaxed. George acknowledges and says when he's scared. This is something that earlier in this chapter, Dr. Haber says is feminine, is childish, is weak. And here after the dream, we see Dr. Haber sort of telling himself, I must be strong. I must know all the answers. I must be confident. And for that reason, to Daryl's question, he's absolutely lying, right? He's lying to George, and maybe he's lying to himself. We don't know. But because of this omniscient narration, we know Dr. Haber knows it used to be a mountain. Now it's a horse. And that means that George's dreams do change reality. And this is like Ruba was saying, and Daryl just said, this makes sense when we think about what happens in the next chapter and the later chapters about what he's doing or what he decides to do to try and use George like a tool or like an instrument to achieve, well, we'll find out about that, as we keep going through the book. But absolutely. So again, we start to see how plot and narrative, POV, theme, character analysis come together here in this chapter. Because like Daryl's question was, wait, I wasn't sure. So does Dr. Haber know that George's dreams really do change the world? He does. But what's confusing, he tells George that he doesn't. And again, I think that only gives the reader more of that dream-like feeling, right? So this is a book about dreams in a certain way, but the tone, the style, the way it's written, the way the author is playing with point of view gives the reader that feeling of a dream too, right? Like, wait, what happened? Is that real? What did they say? Oh, what does that mean? Yes. So again, that's my long answer to Daryl's great question. The short answer, and for people watching on the recording, at this point in the story, on page 24, Dr. Haber already knows that George's dreams change the world, even if he doesn't acknowledge it or tell the truth about that to George. Any other ideas about a point of view or plot in this section here? Cool. Great. Well, again, this chapter 2 is mostly a way for me to talk about the point of view and character analysis and a way to understand the way that the story is written and the way that the author uses narration to make sure that the audience sort of takes away those themes or ideas that the author wants us to take away, right? So I'm going to do one more thing before we finish up here. We're not going to go through all of chapter 3. We won't have time. But I do want to go to page 26 in your book and start to talk about this. Because I'll tell you guys right away, okay, chapter 1 is from the POV of George. Chapter 2 is from the POV of Dr. Haber. If you just look, let's just start here, even with this first paragraph. And I want you to tell me whose POV is this chapter from. We get George Orr left work at 3:30 and walked to the subway station. He had no car. By saving, he might have afforded a VW steamer and the mileage tax on it, but what for? Downtown was closed to automobiles and he lived downtown. He'd learned to drive back in the 80s, but he had never owned a car. He rode the Vancouver subway back into Portland. The trains were already jam-packed. He stood out of reach of strap or stanchion, supported solely by the equalizing pressure of bodies on all sides, occasionally lifted right off his feet and floating as the force of crowding, C, exceeded the force of gravity, G. A man next to him holding a newspaper had never been able to lower his arms, but stood with his face muffled in the sports section. The headline, Big A1 Strike Near Afghan Border, and the subhead, Threat of Afghan Intervention, stared Orr eye to eye for 6 stops. The newspaper holder fought his way off and was replaced by a couple of tomatoes on a green plastic plate, beneath which was an old lady in a green plastic coat who stood on Orr's left foot for 3 more stops. Third person omniscient, of course. Whose point of view, though? Who are we seeing the world through?
The author?
Nori says the author. Let me even be more specific. Which character?
It's a George?
Thank you. Yeah, and I'll tell you right now, as you think about this or look at some of the quotes that I've good. Daryl says George in the chat too. Right, this chapter is absolutely about George, and I want to show you an example of this. Yeah, I'll do this, and then I'll end with a little theme thing. Here on page. Okay, 28, just a little while later. So again, at the beginning, we get much more information. If you guys are curious about setting and all this stuff, she gives us gorgeous, scary details about sort of how she imagines that the planet might change and how that could affect human life and human cities. We get all these gorgeous descriptions of the river and the city and the setting that's taking place. But we get all that information because George is on his way to see Dr. Haber again. And I'm going to look here on this is paper page 28. It starts the paragraph in the middle of the page. I'm going to read through this. And then again, I want you to think about point of view and character analysis, okay? So George arrives at Dr. Haber's office, and then we get this paragraph on page 28. Ms. Crouch, smiling uninterestedly, showed him right in. Orr had thought that psychiatrists' offices like rabbit holes always had a front and a back door. This one didn't, but he doubted that patients, but he doubted, this is a mistake in the PDF. Excuse me, I'm sorry about that, you guys. Okay, I'll start again. Ms. Crouch, smiling uninterestedly, showed him right in. Orr had thought that psychiatrists' office, like rabbit holes, always had a front and back door. This one didn't, but he doubted that patients were likely to run into one another coming and going here. Up at the medical school, they had said that Dr. Haber had only a small psychiatric practice, being essentially a research man. That had given him the notion of someone successful and exclusive, and the doctor's jovial, masterful manner had confirmed it. But today, less nervous, he saw more. The office didn't have the platinum and leather assurance of financial success, nor the rag and bottle assurance of scientific disinterest. The chairs and couch were vinyl. The desk was metal plastic coated with a wood finish. Nothing whatever was genuine. Dr. Haber, white-toothed, bay-maned, huge, boomed out, "Good afternoon." The genealogy was not faked, but it was exaggerated. There was a warmth to the man, an outgoingness which was real, but it had got plastic-coated with professional mannerisms, distorted by the doctor's unspontaneous use of himself. Orr felt in him a wish to be liked and a desire to be helpful. The doctor was not, he thought, really sure that anyone else existed and wanted to prove they did by helping them. He boomed, "Good afternoon," so loud because he was never sure he would get an answer. Orr wanted to say something friendly, but nothing personal seemed suitable. He said, "It looks as if Afghanistan might get into the war." Okay. Lots of amazing stuff. Again, this is clearly from George's point of view. So again, what do we learn about? Let's go back to this setting, and then we'll talk about character. What do we learn about the setting? We already saw the setting, Dr. Haber's office. We saw that setting in chapter 2, right? Martha talked about this, and she's not with us anymore now, but Martha talked about the setting for Dr. Haber's office. I think Nori talked about it too. We get the setting from chapter 2 as Dr. Haber sees it, but now we get the setting, Dr. Haber's office, from George's point of view. How does George see the office? What do we learn about this from George's point of view?
George's point of view has more descriptive and more, you see more than what did we know before?
Absolutely. So what did we learn, Nori?
So he described the office. You know, he described Dr. Hopper as well.
Yes.
And all those.
Give me an adjective there. I think you're right to link the two. He definitely, there's a connection that the reader can make from the way he describes the office to the way he describes Dr. Haber. And what do they have in common? What's similar between the office and Dr. Haber, according to George? What are they like? I'd say it's in here. It's in these sentences.
I'm ready.
Anybody else? There's some key adjectives here. Actually, there's key adjectives even in this. There's some key adjectives here that from George's point of view, we get a description of Dr. Haber and his office. Can anyone see or find those keywords? Adjectives. Adjectives. When Chan, I see you. Unmute yourself. You want to guess?
The adjective at
Yeah.
the desk was metal.
Good. Yeah. We get the vinyl. The desk was metal, plastic coated with a wood finish. How about just in this sentence? Nothing whatever was.
Genius.
Yes, genuine. And then we get this, the genealogy was not
Fake.
Yep. There was a warmth to the man which was real, but it had got plastic coated with professional mannerisms. So here there is this metaphor about plastic, right? Metal plastic coated with fake wood. Then he says that Dr. Haber has this sort of element of being plastic coated. So once again, we get this feeling of what? Genuine, real versus fake. We get this idea of something that's natural, metal, and then something that's made by human beings, plastic, right? So what would you say, Wen-Chen? What do you think all of this adds up? What do you think how does George see Dr. Haber at this point in the story? How does he see him?
It's kind of like the George think the Dr. Haber. But Haber is seem like he's very nice to patient or something show, but it's kind of like he wearing a mask.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think you're right. And I think, again, why I introduced it to you guys last week, this idea of reality versus non-reality, what's real, what's fake, what's authentic, what's not authentic. This shows up in so many different ways in the story, you guys, right? It's not just dreams versus reality. It's also personalities, right? So in this case, again, I love this sentence, right? So that geniality, that way of being nice. So it's not that Dr. Haber was mean. The geniality wasn't faked, but it was exaggerated. There was a warmth to the man. There was a warmth to the man, an outgoingness which was real, but it had got plastic coated with professional mannerisms distorted by the doctor's unspontaneous use of himself. Right, so again, there's some really deep character study stuff, again, even in these first few paragraphs. But again, I do want to make sure that you guys see the difference here, right? So the way that George sees Dr. Haber is not the same way that Dr. Haber sees himself. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
If it doesn't, stop me. Otherwise, I'm going to keep going. And again, I think you all know this. We all know this, right? The vision that we have of our own selves and our own life, that's, not everybody sees us the same way, right? Usually our friends and our family, the deepest people in our life, the most important relationships, usually those people see us as we see ourselves. But of course, sometimes you go to work or school or a person in work or school, or you go to a grocery store, the person that you go and that helps you check out and pay for your food at the grocery store, they don't know anything about you, right? Their point of view, their perception of you, maybe it is exactly true, maybe it's not, right? And that's what this idea about reliable and unreliable narrator goes back to from last week, right? So this is not that same example of reliable and unreliable like, ooh, one of the characters in this story is a drug addict, or one of the characters in this story is mentally ill, so they're crazy, right? The reality they see is a false reality. It's not like that. But this story, this book absolutely does play with, well, what happens, right? Like some people, Dr. Haber sees himself a certain way and imagines his personality a certain way, but George sees him in a different way, right? In chapter 4, which we'll talk about next week, we meet Miss Lalache. Heather Lalache sees George in a totally different way than Dr. Haber sees George, right? So all of this is important when you start to think about doing a character analysis, right? So, and I'll ask you guys, because we've got just a few minutes here, what do you think about George's perception of Dr. Haber? Do you think that it's true? Does Dr. Haber seem like a person who wears a mask? If you've read these first few chapters or later in the book, do you agree or disagree with George's description of Dr. Haber here? We don't know yet, Jeff. We're not sure. Okay. Let me show you one more quote and then we'll finish. I don't know if it's the character analysis that's making people quiet or what's going on, but let's go to page 33. We're going to go to 33, and I want this last quote to look at is another way to understand sort of how George's point of view in this chapter gives us more information about Dr. Haber. So let me go to that, page 33 in the paper book. So again, just for plot wise, right? George arrives at his office. We see George's perspective and some of George's opinions about Dr. Haber here. They're talking about these effective dreams. And at one point, George says, hey, why don't you instruct me, give me the instructions to never have an effective dream again, right? That might work. Because all George wants is to stop these effective dreams. George just wants to stop his dreams from changing reality, right? So he says to Dr. Haber, hey, give me instructions. Tell me to have an effective dream where I never have an effective dream again, right? And as he does that, Dr. Haber, of course, does not like this idea, and here's what he says. Haber settled down behind his desk, hunched like a bear. I very much doubt it would work, even through one night, he said quite simply, and then suddenly booming again. Isn't that the same fruitless direction you've been trying to go, George? Drugs or hypnosis, it's still suppression. You can't run away from your own mind. You see that, but you're not quite willing yet to face it. That's all right. Look at it this way. Twice now you've dreamed right here on that couch. Was it so bad? Did it do any harm? Or shook his head, too low-spirited to answer. Haber went on talking, and Orr tried to give him his attention. He was talking now about daydreams, about their relationship to the hour-and-a-half dreaming cycles of the night, about their uses and value. He asked Orr if any particular type of daydream was congenial to him. For example, he said, I frequently daydream heroics. I am the hero. I am saving a girl or a fellow astronaut or a besieged city or the whole damn planet. Messiah dreams, do-gooder dreams. Haber saves the world. They're a hell of a lot of fun, so long as I keep them where they belong. We all need that ego boost we get from daydreams, but when we start relying on it, then our reality parameters are going a bit shaky. Well, then there's the South Sea Island type daydreams. A lot of middle-aged executives go in for them, and the noble suffering martyr type, and the various romantic fantasies of adolescence, and the sadomasochistic daydream, and so on. Most people recognize most types. We've almost all been in the arena facing the lions at least once, or thrown a bomb and destroyed our enemies, or rescued the pneumatic virgin from the sinking ship, or written Beethoven's 10th Symphony for him. Which style do you favor? Now here, this is not as much point of view, right? But I think that there's very, very important character analysis stuff going on here, because what do we learn about the daydreams, about the vision that Dr. Haber has for himself? What do we learn about Dr. Haber here?
I think the Dr. Haber is kind of like a tell the George that he's kind of like the brainwash to tell George to accept his dream, because it's telling him that was it so bad, did it do any harm? It's kind of telling him that you can accept. And also he's saying the other, for example, the other dreams examples, it's kind of like a tell him.
And yes, 100%. And what type of dream does Dr. Haber like, Wen-Chen?
I don't know.
It's right here. It's right here on the page. He says, let's do this one. How about just in these blue sentences? So what does he say? When Haber's daydreaming, what does he dream for himself?
Save the world?
Eso, right? Eso, that's right. I frequently daydream heroics. I am the hero. I'm saving a girl or a fellow astronaut or a besieged city or the whole damn planet, right? So now I'll ask you, Wen-Chen, what do you think? What does this say about Dr. Haber? What does this tell us about the type of character analysis? What does it tell us about who he is as a person?
I think the Dr. Haber, he wants the power. It's opposite to the George. He wants to control.
Good. I agree. I agree. Anybody else want to talk about this paragraph? Because this is some very powerful character analysis stuff here, right? We have Dr. Haber in his own words telling us about who he is, right? Giving us some big clue about who he is. So any idea about how these quotes connect back to themes or anything about the character of Dr. Haber? Can I ask, so we've got a few minutes left. Are we quiet because we're tired, or we're confused? And I ask because if we're tired, that's fine. If we're confused, I need to make sure I change my lesson for next week. So are we tired or confused?
Professor, I'm confused with today's meeting because I was absent last week, but you don't send us the recording, the meeting. I didn't receive it.
Wasn't it posted? Isn't last week's lesson posted, you guys? Am I crazy?
Did you post the recording from last week meeting?
I thought so. If I didn't, it was my mistake. Oh yeah, here it is. Zoom recording PowerPoint presentation.
Oh,
And
sorry, I can't find it.
That's okay, Rahila. Yeah, so if you didn't see last week's, of course, I understand why you're confused. And I think, yeah, I posted and then I sent the announcement the day after too. So it's there, Rahila. Go back and rewatch, because again, I'll tell you all right now, not just Rahila, but anybody, right? If you're watching this recording, you need for the final paper, you've got to be able to talk about character and theme for the final paper. So if you're not sure what that is or how to do it, go back and rewatch last week's lesson, review today's lesson, because again, what I wanted to do today is to sort of do analysis talking in live time. So this type of activity that we're doing in class right now is what I'm going to ask you to do for the essay. So if you're really lost, come with questions, or make sure you know what to ask. Make sure you know what to ask next week. So again, that's, and Rahila, like I said, if you didn't watch last week's class yet, I totally understand, Rahila. So, and thank you for telling me you're confused. That's totally fine, right? Being confused is okay. It's my job to help you go from confused to clear. Anybody else? Anybody else unclear about what we're doing? Especially if you were here with me last week and you're confused. Cool. Well, then the last thing I'll say before we finish up is I'm going to sort of present. So keep going, right? Just keep reading as much as you can. We're going to talk through, I think we'll just keep going. I'm going to pick up where I stopped here. Next week, we'll introduce chapter 4 and we'll get to meet Heather Lalash, our third and most important character. Well, I think Heather isn't the most important character. We have 3 of the most important characters are Dr. Haber, George, and Heather Lalash. But the last thing I wanted to say is, again, to go back to these quotes that are at the beginning of each chapter. So the beginning of chapter 3 starts on page 26. But this is my favorite one in the whole book, and this is one of my favorite ideas in my whole life. So I'm planting this idea for you to start to think about when we talk about theme for this book. There's this quote here at the beginning of chapter 3 that says, "Those whom heaven helps, we call the sons of heaven. They do not learn this by learning. They do not work it by working. They do not reason it by using reason. To let understanding stop at what cannot be understood is a high attainment. Those who cannot do it will be destroyed on the lathe of heaven." We don't have really time to talk about it, but this sentence here, to let understanding stop at what cannot be understood is a high attainment. I think you could make an argument that this is one of the biggest themes in this whole book. So I would just encourage you that as you keep reading the book, think about this idea of understanding and not understanding, again, of action and non-action, and where there is wisdom in this, right? When is it wise to say, I don't know and I will never know, and that's okay, right? When is it wise to say, the best thing to do right now is nothing? I think that is a sort of central question at the heart of this book. And I think Dr. Haber and George represent 2 different sides of that question. So when you think about protagonist, antagonist, it's not, Superman, bad guy, right? It's sort of the protagonist and the antagonist in this book sort of represent 2 different philosophies, 2 different perspectives, 2 different ways of being in the world. And I really encourage you to look at this sentence here at the beginning of chapter 3 and ask yourself, ooh, how does this idea come into being and come into play for the characters in this book, throughout the whole book, really throughout the whole book. Abdul says there, how many chapters do we need to read for the next class? Let me see if I gave the schedule. I think I put it in Canvas. It's here on, course materials, excuse me. I don't know if I gave you guys page numbers last time. I mean, the real answer to Abdul's question, so again, now I'm going to the audio recording for the Lathe of Heaven. No, so all the audio is here. I didn't even make a schedule, Abdul. It's because I'm not doing reading quizzes. I'm not doing graded activities in Canvas. The way that I'm going to do this book is really come to class, talk to me about the book, watch the recording if you can't come to class. And then the final essay is just going to be doing this, right? Analyzing the book and analyzing characters. So read as much as you can, as fast as you can. If you go to course materials and click the Lathe of Heaven audio link here, you can listen to me read the book. Ruba found a YouTube video of a movie version of the book. So read as much as you can. Read as much as you can, as fast as you can. Any questions before we finish up and get ready for next week? Cool. So next week I'm going to assign the final essay. And again, it's just going to be a longer essay where I ask you to do this type of literary analysis. So I'll introduce that next week and we'll talk through it. Speaking of dreams, it's my dream. I think I can finish grading the poetry projects before next week. And I think that's all I have for today. Any questions about The Lathe of Heaven or about fiction, about anything for this class before we finish up?
Professor, do we have to finish reading this book before we start the essay, or how does that work?
No, I mean, I'm going to assign it. The essay is basically going to be due the last week of class, Nori. So you're going to have time. Do you know what I mean? Between assign the essay and when it's due. But again, it's like I'm saying, the sooner you finish the book, I mean, this is one of those things that it is not like a research writing class project, Nori, because the more time you spend with this book, the more time you read it and think about it, the more time you practice some of the skills we just did in class together, the more prepared you'll be for the essay, right? It's not like read page 1 through 30 and then take a true false quiz. That is just not the way I teach. So the more time you can spend with it as much as possible, the better prepared you're going to be.
All right, thank you.
Yep. Anybody else before I stop recording and finish class? Cool. I'll stop the recording, and if anybody has specific questions, I'll be here. But otherwise, I will see you all next week.
Bye, Professor.
Bye, Daryl.
Good.